New builds that come pre-haunted, closets that answer when you pull a string, shadow people standing in your doorway, and whole families born seeing what others can't. Every story tonight is real. Before we start, tell me in the comments, what scares you more? Haunted houses, haunted bloodlines, or your own mind turning on you? Story 1. Over the summer, I moved in with my dad and my stepmother. It was her house, not ours, and from the very beginning, she made it clear that the place had a history. She didn't say it in a joking way either. She was serious about it. She believed the house was haunted, and not just in a general way. She talked about one specific presence like it was just another person living there with us. She called him Fred. According to her, Fred was a Russian man, bald, strong-looking, and for some reason she always compared him to Mr. Clean. That part always sounded strange to me, almost funny, but the way she talked about him wasn't funny at all. She said he wasn't dangerous. In fact, she believed he protected her. She would say it like it was a fact, like saying the house had electricity or running water. Fred was just part of the house. I didn't believe any of it. At that point in my life, ghosts weren't something I took seriously. I figured people saw things, imagined things, or just let their minds run wild. So when she told me those stories, I didn't argue, but I didn't accept them either. I just brushed it off and moved on. The bigger issue was that my stepmother and I didn't get along. From the moment I moved in, there was tension. We argued a lot, sometimes over small things that shouldn't have mattered. It felt like we were always one wrong sentence away from another fight. Living in that house wasn't peaceful. It felt like there was always pressure in the air, like something building up. One day, I was out in the garage with my dad. We were working on something simple, just passing time and getting things done. The garage itself was pretty standard, but it always felt a little closed in. Tools hanging on the walls, wood stacked in the corners, the smell of dust and metal mixed together. My stepmother came in, and almost immediately we got into an argument. I can't even remember what it was about now. It was probably something small, something that didn't matter, but it escalated fast like it always did. Voices got louder, words got sharper, and eventually she just snapped. She stormed out of the garage, angry, and left the house altogether. It got quiet after that. My dad and I stayed in the garage, both of us a little tense but trying to move past it. We went back to what we were doing, not really talking about what just happened. A few minutes passed, maybe 5 at most, when something strange happened. There was a hammer resting on a wooden block near where I was standing. I remember it clearly because I'd just seen it sitting there. Out of nowhere, it fell. It didn't slide, it didn't wobble and drop slowly. It just fell straight to the ground. The sound echoed louder than it should have. My dad and I both looked at it, but neither of us said anything. We just kind of brushed it off. Maybe it had been unbalanced. Maybe it had been sitting too close to the edge. There was always a logical explanation, and that's what we chose to believe. We went back to work. About 10 minutes later, there was a loud thud from the back of the garage. This time, it wasn't something small. It sounded heavy, like something solid hitting the ground or the wall. The kind of sound that makes you stop what you're doing immediately. We both froze. I remember looking at my dad, waiting for him to say something, to explain it, but he didn't. He just listened. The garage suddenly felt different, quieter, but not in a normal way. It felt like something was there with us, just out of sight. And the thing was, we both knew my stepmother wasn't there. She had left. We had seen her go, so there shouldn't have been anyone else in the garage. We didn't go check right away. We just stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch out. Eventually, we tried to shake it off again. Maybe something fell in the back. Maybe something shifted, but the feeling didn't go away. Then, about half an hour later, it happened again. This time it was louder, clearer. 5 distinct bangs. It sounded exactly like a hammer striking a sawhorse. Not random noise, and not something falling. It was controlled, spaced out, one hit after another. Bang, 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 bang. Each hit echoed through the garage, sharp and deliberate. There was no movement around us, no one in sight, no reason for that sound to be happening. That was it. My dad and I didn't say a word. We didn't try to explain it. We just ran. Both of us bolted out of the garage at the same time, like some instinct kicked in telling us to get out. We didn't stop until we were outside. That was the moment everything shifted for me. Up until then, I had been able to explain things away. I could ignore the stories about Fred. I could laugh it off in my head. But standing there outside the garage, heart racing, I realized I didn't have an explanation for what we had just heard. And it wasn't just me. My dad had heard it too. After that day, I started paying more attention to things in the house. Small details, little moments that I would have ignored before. And slowly, I started noticing things that didn't feel right. The nights were the worst. One night, I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why at first. It felt like something had pulled me out of sleep. I looked at the clock, and it read 3:15. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Then I felt it. A light scratching sensation on my back. At first I thought I was imagining it, like maybe I was still half asleep. But it continued. Slow, deliberate, like fingers dragging lightly across my skin. I froze, and I didn't want to move, but I knew I had to check. Slowly, I turned over. There was no one there. My room was empty. The door was closed. Nothing had changed, but the feeling had been real. I knew it had been. I sat there for a long time after that, not moving, just listening to the silence. That wasn't the only night something like that happened, but it was the one that stuck with me the most. After a while, I noticed that my stepmother had started burning sage more often. At first, it was just every now and then. Then it became regular. She would walk through the house with it, letting the smoke drift into corners, into hallways, into rooms that always felt a little colder than the rest. She said it helped keep things calm. She never directly connected it to the things I experienced, but I could tell she knew more than she said. Sometimes I would catch her looking toward empty spaces, like she was listening for something. And every time she mentioned Fred, she spoke about him the same way, like he was still there, like he was watching, like he was protecting. I still don't fully understand what happened in that house. Part of me wants to believe there's a normal explanation for everything. Sounds can be explained. Objects can fall. The mind can play tricks, especially at night. But another part of me remembers those 5 hammer strikes. Clear, intentional, impossible to ignore, and the feeling of something touching my back when no one was there. I don't know if Fred was real. I don't know if there was something in that house or if it was just a series of strange coincidences that all happened at the worst possible times. What I do know is that after living there, I stopped being so quick to dismiss things I couldn't explain. Because sometimes, when you're standing in a quiet garage and you hear something that shouldn't exist, you realize that not everything fits into logic as neatly as you want it to. And sometimes, the scariest part isn't what you see, it's what you hear, and knowing there's no one there who could have made that sound. Story 2. For as long as I can remember, I've had these strange moments that feel like they don't belong to the present. They usually start as dreams, nothing dramatic or obviously important, just small, ordinary scenes. A door opening in a restaurant, a short conversation, a random moment that doesn't seem worth remembering. At first, I never paid attention to them. They felt like any other dream, the kind that fades as soon as you wake up. For years, I thought what I was experiencing later on was just déjà vu. You know that feeling where something seems familiar for no clear reason, like you've lived through the moment before. It would happen out of nowhere, and I would just brush it off. It didn't seem like anything serious, just a weird glitch in my memory. But then, things started to feel different. One day, I was having a normal conversation with my mom. Nothing unusual, just talking like we always do. In the middle of it, something clicked in my head. It wasn't just a feeling of familiarity this time. I could actually remember the dream. I had seen this exact moment before. Her standing there, the tone of her voice, even the way the conversation was about to go. Before she could finish what she was saying, I completed her sentence. I didn't even think about it. It just came out naturally, like I already knew what she was going to say. She stopped and looked at me, confused, and asked how I knew what she was about to say. I didn't have an answer. I just told her I didn't know. At the time, it felt ridiculous. Even to me, it sounded strange, like I was overthinking something simple. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a coincidence. I had seen that moment before clearly, in a dream. After that, I started paying more attention. The same kind of thing kept happening. Small moments, nothing major, but always familiar in a very specific way. It wasn't just a vague sense of recognition, it was detailed. I could recall the exact feeling of the dream as the real moment was happening. It was like my brain was catching up to something it had already experienced. Then came the moment that really changed how I saw all of this. I was standing in the driveway, about to get into the car with my sister. It was a normal day, nothing special about it. Then suddenly, and that same feeling hit me again, the kind that stops you for a second because something feels off, like time is repeating itself. In that instant, I remembered the dream. Our dad was about to call out to us from behind the shed next to the driveway. I knew it before it happened. I could feel it building, like I was waiting for something I had already seen. And then it happened. He called out exactly the way I remembered. I turned and looked at my sister, expecting her to just brush it off like always. But she was already looking at me, and there was something in her expression that made my stomach drop. We both had the same look of confusion. Before I could even say anything, we both admitted it at the same time. We had both seen that exact moment before, in a dream. Not just something similar, the same moment, the same setting, the same voice, the same feeling. And it wasn't the first time for either of us. Well, that's when it stopped feeling like something I could ignore. As I got older, the premonitions didn't go away. If anything, they became more noticeable. I got used to them in a strange way, like they were just a part of how my mind worked. Most of them were still small, everyday moments, nothing life-changing, but they were always accurate, always just enough to make me pause. Then things started to shift again. Lately, the dreams have changed. They still come the same way, random, are ordinary situations, but now there's always something off about the ending. Most of the dream will match real life almost perfectly, like 80% of it plays out exactly the same. But toward the end, something goes wrong. Sometimes I get arrested in the dream. Other times, I get a phone call telling me something terrible has happened, like the death of my mom or dad. It's always something stressful, something heavy, something that doesn't fit with the normal flow of the moment. And that's the part that stays with me. Now, when one of those moments starts happening in real life, I don't just recognize it, I freeze. It's like I'm waiting for the bad part to happen, even if it never does. My body reacts before my mind can calm it down. My chest tightens, my thoughts race, and I can't shake the feeling that something is about to go wrong. Most of the time, the bad part never actually happens. The moment just ends normally, like any other day. But the fear stays. I start questioning everything. Was the dream wrong, or is the ending just delayed? Is something still going to happen later that I'm not seeing yet? It creates this constant tension, like I'm stuck between what I've already seen and what's actually real. The strangest part is that I'm not a very spiritual or religious person. I don't jump to supernatural explanations. If anything, I lean toward the idea that there's some kind of scientific reason behind it, something about the brain, memory, or perception that we just don't fully understand yet. But knowing that doesn't make it any less unsettling, because when you're standing in a moment that you know you've already experienced in a dream, and everything is lining up exactly the way you remember, it doesn't feel like a theory. It feels real. It feels immediate. And when those darker endings are attached to those dreams, it makes every one of those moments feel like the beginning of something you don't want to reach. I still have these premonitions. They never really stopped. I've learned to live with them, but I haven't learned how to explain them. Every time it happens, there's still that brief pause where reality feels slightly off, like I'm stepping into something that's already been written. And no matter how much I try to stay calm, there's always that thought in the back of my mind. What if this time the ending matches too? Story 3. When I was a kid, the three of us shared a room. I slept on the top bunk. My twin brother had the bottom bunk, and my oldest brother slept on a trundle bed that pulled out right in front of us. It was a tight space, but it felt normal back then. We were used to it. The door to the hallway stayed open at night, and if you looked out from the bunks, you could see down the hall toward my parents' room. One night, I woke up suddenly, and right away I knew something was wrong. I was lying flat on my back, staring up, and I couldn't move. Not my arms, not my legs, not even my head. The only thing I could move was my eyes. At first, I thought I was just waking up slowly, like my body hadn't caught up yet, but then the fear hit me. Something felt off, heavy, like the air itself had changed. I tried to call out, but nothing came out. My mouth wouldn't open. My chest felt tight, like something was pressing down on me already, even before anything actually touched me. Panic started to build, slow at first, and then all at once. I remember thinking I needed to get my dad. His room was down the hall, and if I could just make a sound or move even a little, maybe he would hear me. I turned my eyes toward the open door. The hallway was dark, just shadows stretching into deeper darkness. I stared, hoping to see some kind of movement, some sign of life, anything that could help me feel less alone in that moment. But all I saw at first was blackness. Then the shadows started to change. At first, it was subtle, or like the darkness was shifting in a way that didn't make sense. Then it became clearer. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore. They were moving, slowly, deliberately, like something was stepping out from the darkness itself. The shape of a man formed in the hallway. Tall, maybe around 6 feet, but completely featureless. It was darker than the darkness around it, like a void cut out of the night. No face, no details, just a solid black shape. It didn't reflect any light at all. It didn't even look like a normal shadow. It looked deeper, like it didn't belong there. I watched it walk into the room. It made no sound. The floor didn't creak. Nothing shifted. Nothing reacted. It was like it had no weight at all. My fear was overwhelming at that point, but I still couldn't move. I couldn't even shut my eyes. All I could do was watch. It stepped onto the trundle bed where my oldest brother was sleeping. Its foot came down right on him, but he didn't react at all. He didn't move, didn't wake up, didn't even shift in his sleep. It was like the thing wasn't really there, at least not for him. Then it reached up and grabbed the bar of the top bunk, using it to pull itself higher. It stepped onto my twin brother's bed next. Again, nothing. No movement, no sound, no reaction. My brother just kept sleeping like nothing was happening. By that point, it was almost at my level. I could see it clearly now, if clearly is even the right word. There were still no details, no features, just that same deep, unnatural blackness shaped like a man. Then it pulled itself up onto the top bunk. It moved slowly, almost gracefully, like it had done this before. It swung one leg over, then the other, until it was straddling me. One leg on either side of my body. I could feel its presence even before it touched me, like the air around me had grown heavier, colder. It paused there for a moment. I couldn't see a face, but I knew it was looking at me. That feeling was undeniable. It was aware of me, focused on me. Then it placed its hands on my chest. The pressure came instantly, not gradual, not gentle. It slammed down hard, like all its force was pushed into me at once. It felt violent, angry, like it meant to hurt me. My ribs felt like they were being crushed inward. The pain was sharp and overwhelming, like I couldn't get any air into my lungs at all. I tried to breathe, but I couldn't. The pressure didn't ease. It held there for what felt like forever, though it was probably only a few seconds. The pain kept building until everything went black. I don't remember anything after that. The next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight was coming through the room, and everything looked normal again. My brothers were there, asleep like nothing had happened. The door was still open. The hallway looked ordinary, but my chest still hurt. It wasn't just a memory of pain. It was real. My ribs felt sore, like I had been hit hard. Breathing felt difficult, like my lungs had to work harder than usual. There were no bruises, nothing visible, but the pain was there. It stayed with me for days. Every breath reminded me of what had happened. I didn't tell anyone. Even as a kid, I knew how it would sound. There was no way to explain it without it sounding impossible. And part of me didn't even believe it myself. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, something my mind created while I was half asleep. But dreams don't leave pain behind like that. For about a week, my breathing felt strained. Then slowly, it went back to normal. Life moved on, like it always does. Nothing like that ever happened again in the same way. But even now, I still think about that night. I've grown up to be a rational person. I don't believe in ghost stories. I don't jump to supernatural explanations. I know about things like sleep paralysis, and how the mind can create vivid hallucinations, how fear can make everything feel more real than it is. And maybe that's all it was. But no explanation I've ever heard fully accounts for what I saw and what I felt. The way it moved, the way it touched me, the pain that stayed after I woke up. Even now, sometimes when I'm in a dark room, I catch myself looking into the corners without meaning to, watching the shadows just for a second longer than I should. Because once you've seen the shadows move, once you've watched them walk, it's hard to ever see darkness the same way again. Story 4. One of the creepiest experiences I've ever had happened at my boyfriend's parents' house. They'd gone away for a week and asked us to stay there to take care of the house and their dogs. At first, everything felt normal. It actually felt kind of nice having the place to ourselves. The house was quiet, comfortable, and we settled into a routine pretty quickly. During the day, nothing seemed off at all. My boyfriend had always mentioned that he thought the house might be haunted, but not in a scary way. He would say things like objects being slightly out of place or small things moving around without explanation. He never acted afraid of it, more like he had just accepted it. I didn't really like talking about that kind of stuff, so I always brushed it off. I told myself there was always a logical explanation for things like that. As the days passed, nothing unusual really happened. We took care of the dogs, watched TV, ate together, and just enjoyed the quiet. If anything strange did happen, it was so small that I didn't even notice. I felt comfortable enough that I stopped thinking about what he had said. Then one of the last nights we were there, something happened that I still can't explain. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. I wasn't fully awake, just barely conscious. It was one of those moments where you're half asleep, you're turning over to get comfortable again. The room was dark, and everything felt calm at first. Then I heard it. It sounded like little kids laughing. At the time, I didn't react the way you would expect. I was so tired that my brain didn't fully process it. It felt distant, almost like it was part of a dream. I remember hearing it clearly, but I didn't sit up or open my eyes fully. I just stayed there, half asleep, and let it pass. Not long after that, I remember the dogs starting to bark. It wasn't just one bark either. They sounded alert, like something had caught their attention, but again I didn't think too much of it. The dogs barked at everything. Small noises, movements outside, even things we couldn't hear. It didn't seem unusual at the time. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, everything felt normal again. Sunlight came through the windows. The house looked exactly the same, and nothing seemed out of place. But as the day went on, that memory came back to me. The sound of the kids laughing. This time, I was fully awake, and it didn't feel normal anymore. It didn't feel like a dream. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became in my mind. The sound had been too distinct, too real. It wasn't muffled or unclear like a dream usually is. It was sharp, like it was actually happening somewhere in the house. I started trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was part of a dream. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was some kind of noise from outside that my brain turned into something else. I kept going back and forth, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Eventually, I decided to bring it up to my boyfriend. I told him how I had woken up during the night and heard what sounded like kids laughing. I expected him to brush it off, maybe laugh a little and say it was just a dream. Instead, he looked at me in a way I hadn't seen before. His expression changed instantly, like something clicked in his head. He looked uneasy, almost nervous. Then he told me that he remembered hearing the same thing. That moment made my stomach drop. It wasn't just me. He described it in a similar way. He had heard children laughing during the night too. Not loud, not close enough to pinpoint exactly where it was coming from, but clear enough that it stood out. We both went quiet after that. The more we talked about it, the less it made sense. His parents' house isn't in a place where you'd expect to hear kids outside at night. It's not that kind of neighborhood. I had never seen children around there, not during the day, and definitely not at night. And even if there were kids nearby, the sound didn't match that idea. It sounded too young, too playful, like very small children. the kind that wouldn't be outside on their own, especially that late at night. We tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was a TV left on somewhere. Maybe it was coming from far away and just sounded closer than it was. Maybe the dogs reacted to something completely unrelated. But none of those explanations felt right. The sound had been too clear. And the fact that both of us heard it, separately, without knowing the other had experienced it too, made it even harder to explain away. After that, the house didn't feel quite the same. It wasn't like we were suddenly terrified, but there was this quiet tension that hadn't been there before. Every little sound stood out more. The silence at night felt heavier. Even the dogs seemed different. Every time they barked after that, I found myself paying more attention, wondering if they were reacting to something we couldn't see. Nothing else major happened for the rest of the time we stayed there, but that one experience was enough. It stuck with me long after we left. I still don't know what it was. I still try to think of a logical explanation whenever I remember it. But no matter how I look at it, I always come back to the same thought. Two people heard the same thing at the same time, in a place where it shouldn't have been possible. And that's the part that makes it hard to forget. Story 5. I woke up earlier than usual that morning, though I didn't know what had pulled me out of sleep. The room was still dark, the kind of quiet darkness that comes just before sunrise. My head was still resting on the pillow, my body heavy with sleep, but my eyes were open. At first everything felt normal. Then I noticed something that made my chest tighten. There was someone standing in my bedroom doorway. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe properly at first. I just stared. The hallway light wasn't on, but faint moonlight spilled in through the windows down the hall, just enough to outline the figure. It was completely black, darker than the darkness around it, like it absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. I couldn't make out any features. No face, no clothes, nothing. Just the shape of a person standing there, perfectly still, looking directly at me. I told myself it had to be one of my parents. It was the only thing that made sense, but something about it felt wrong. My mom usually moved right away if she came into my room, either to wake me up or grab something. She didn't just stand there. And my dad wasn't the type to come into my room silently in the middle of the night. Still, I stayed completely still. I didn't want to alert it, whoever it was, that I was awake. Seconds stretched out in a way that made them feel much longer than they actually were. Later, I figured it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 seconds, but in that moment it felt like minutes. Long enough for my mind to race through possibilities, long enough for fear to settle deep into my chest. The figure didn't move. It didn't shift its weight. It didn't breathe. It just stood there watching me. I remember thinking, if this is my mom, why isn't she saying anything? And then, without any warning, it turned. The movement was smooth, almost too smooth, like it didn't have joints or weight. It simply rotated and began to walk away from my doorway, down the hallway. I followed it with my eyes, still not moving from my bed. My heart was beating faster now, but I was trying to stay calm. It walked toward my parents' room. For a brief moment I felt relief. That made sense. Maybe it really was my mum after all, just checking on me before going back to her room. But that feeling didn't last long. A couple of seconds later, the figure appeared again in the hallway. That was the first moment something inside me shifted from confusion to fear. It didn't come from my parents' room like a normal person would. It was just there again. And then it turned and started walking in the other direction, toward the stairs. This time, I felt a strong urge to get up. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was instinct, or maybe I just needed to prove to myself that there was a logical explanation for what I had just seen. I slowly lifted my head, then pushed myself up, careful not to make any noise. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, my feet touching the cold floor. Every small sound felt louder than it should have. I reached over to my nightstand and grabbed my glasses, or putting them on quickly so I could see clearly. For a second I hesitated. Part of me wanted to just stay in my room, pull the covers over my head, and forget about it. But the other part of me, the rational part, needed answers. So I stepped out into the hallway. The air felt different out there. Cooler, maybe. Or maybe that was just my nerves. I looked toward the stairs, half expecting to see the figure still there, but it was gone. I moved slowly, carefully placing each step to avoid the spots I knew would creak. I had lived in that house long enough to know exactly which boards made noise and which didn't. When I reached the top of the stairs, I paused again. The house below was dim, lit only by the faint light coming through the windows. I leaned slightly over the railing, looking down toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw my mom. She was sitting at the kitchen table, completely normal, calmly organizing her bag. The one she always took to work. Papers, maybe a notebook, a few small items spread out in front of her. Everything about the scene looked ordinary. I checked my watch. 5:45 a.m. That lined up perfectly. She worked early shifts sometimes. It made sense that she'd be up and getting ready. I let out a quiet breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. Okay, I thought to myself. It was just Mom. The figure I saw must have been her. Maybe the lighting made her look darker than usual. Maybe my eyes were still adjusting from sleep. Maybe I had imagined part of it. That explanation felt comfortable, safe. I stayed there for another moment, watching her, just to be sure. She didn't look up. She didn't act like anything unusual had happened. She just continued getting ready for her day. I turned and went back to my room. Even as I lay back down, something still didn't sit right with me. There was a small, quiet voice in the back of my mind that kept replaying what I had seen. The way the figure stood there, the way it moved, the way it seemed to reappear. But I pushed those thoughts away. I told myself I'd ask her about it later, just to confirm. Eventually I fell back asleep. The rest of the day passed like any normal day. Nothing strange happened. No weird sounds, no strange feelings. By the time evening came, the whole experience felt distant, like something that had happened in a dream. But I didn't forget. That night, when my mom got home, I decided to bring it up. We were in the kitchen again, almost in the same place I had seen her that morning. The lighting was different now, warmer, more comforting. It felt like a completely different environment. I tried to keep my tone casual. "Hey," I said, "were you in my room this morning before work?" She looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "Like, around 5:30 or so. I woke up and saw you standing in my doorway." She shook her head slowly. "No, I wasn't." I felt a small knot form in my stomach. "Are you sure?" I asked. "You stood there for a bit, then walked away." She gave a slight laugh, but it wasn't amused. It was more like she was trying to understand what I was talking about. "No," she said again. "I left the house at 5:30. I didn't go into your room." I just stared at her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "Maybe you were dreaming," she added. That was the obvious explanation, the one that made the most sense. But it didn't feel right. I was awake. I said quietly. "I got up. I followed you. I saw you sitting right here." She frowned slightly. "I was here around that time, yeah, but I didn't come into your room. I was getting ready to leave." The conversation ended there, but the feeling didn't. That night, lying in bed again, I kept thinking about it. If she had left at 5:30, and I saw the figure after that, then who, or what, was standing in my doorway? I went over every detail in my mind. The way it stood completely still, the way it didn't make a sound, the way it moved too smoothly, the way it seemed to appear and disappear in the hallway, and the part that bothered me the most, the fact that it was watching me, not just standing there randomly, but facing me, looking at me, aware of me. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, a half-dream state where my brain mixed reality with something else. But deep down, I knew how it felt. I knew what I saw. And no matter how many times I tried to explain it away, one thought kept coming back over and over again. If that wasn't my mom, then something else was standing in my doorway that morning, and whatever it was, it knew I was watching it too. Story 6. When I was 13, my family moved out to the Texas Hill Country. It was a big change for all of us. The area felt quieter, more open, and honestly a little isolating compared to where we had lived before. While my dad worked on building our new house from the ground up, we stayed in a double-wide trailer. It wasn't anything fancy, just 2 prefabricated sections joined together, but it was home for a couple of years. I shared a bedroom with my brother. It was a simple room, nothing unusual about it, except for one small detail that stuck in my mind more clearly than almost anything else from that time. The closet light didn't have a switch on the wall. Instead, it was controlled by a string hanging down from the fixture. You had to pull the string to turn the light on and off. It was one of those things you don't really think about, but for some reason, that string and that light became the center of one of the strangest experiences I've ever had. I can't remember exactly how I first discovered it. It wasn't like a big moment where something dramatic happened. It was probably just boredom. Kids get curious, especially in a quiet place with not much going on. I must have been standing there one day, pulling the string, turning the light on and off just to pass the time. At some point, I noticed something strange. If I pulled the string in a certain pattern, on, off, on, off, on, off, the light would respond. Not right away, but after I stopped. It would turn itself on and off 3 more times, as if something had copied what I just did. The first time it happened, I remember just standing there, or staring at the light. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, or if it had actually happened. It felt too weird to be real, but too clear to ignore. So I tried it again. I pulled the string, on, off, on, off, on, off. Then I stepped back and waited. A second later, the light flicked on by itself, then off, then on again, then off, then on, then off. Exactly 3 times. I felt a chill run through me, but I didn't panic. Not yet. My brain immediately started trying to explain it. And maybe it was just faulty wiring. Maybe there was some kind of delay in the electrical system. Maybe the fixture had a loose connection that reacted when it was used in a certain way. That explanation was enough to keep me from freaking out completely, but it didn't make the feeling go away. There was something about the timing of it. It wasn't random flickering. It wasn't like the light was struggling to stay on. It was controlled, clean, almost deliberate. Still, I told myself it had to be something normal. After that, I didn't play with it often. It wasn't like I was standing there every day trying to trigger it. Most of the time I avoided it, but every now and then, curiosity would win. I'd stand in front of the closet, grab the string and hesitate for a second. Then I'd do it again. On, off, on, off, on, off. And every single time, without fail, the light would respond the same way. 3 more on and off cycles, perfectly spaced like an echo. It always gave me chills. Not the kind that makes you scream or run, but the kind that sits quietly in your chest and makes you uneasy, like something is slightly off, even if you can't prove it. I never told anyone about it at the time. I think part of me was afraid they wouldn't believe me, and another part of me wasn't sure I wanted it to be real. Eventually, those years passed. My dad finished building the new house, and we moved out of the double wide. Life moved on, like it always does. New routines, new rooms, new everything, and for a while, I forgot about the closet light. It became one of those strange childhood memories that fades into the background, something you remember occasionally but don't think too deeply about. Then one day, years later, it came back to me. I don't remember what triggered the memory. Maybe I was cleaning my room, or maybe I was just bored again. But suddenly, I thought about that light in the old trailer and the strange way it used to behave. And then I had a thought that I probably should have ignored. What if it still worked? I went to my closet in the new house. This one had a similar setup with a pull string hanging down from the light fixture. It looked normal, completely ordinary. 99% of me expected nothing to happen. It had been years. This was a different house, different wiring, different everything. The idea that the same thing would happen again didn't make any logical sense. Still, and that 1% of curiosity was enough. I reached up, grabbed the string, and took a breath. Then I pulled it. On, off, on, off, on, off. I let go of the string and stepped back slightly, already feeling a little foolish for even trying. For a split second, nothing happened. And then the light turned on, by itself. My stomach dropped instantly. Then it turned off, then on, then off, then on, then off, exactly 3 times. I didn't stand there analyzing it. I didn't try it again. I didn't wait to see if there was a pattern. I felt a wave of cold rush through my entire body, like every nerve had suddenly lit up at once. My chest tightened, and without thinking, I turned and ran. I ran out of my room, down the stairs, and out of the house as fast as I could. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, a kind of shock that comes from seeing something you were absolutely sure couldn't happen. Later on, I worked up the nerve to tell my dad. I showed him the light, I explained what I had experienced in the old trailer, and then demonstrated it for him. I remember my hands feeling slightly shaky as I pulled the string. On, off, on, off, on, off. We both stood there, waiting. And then it happened again. The light responded, just like before. I looked at him, expecting some kind of explanation, something to make sense of it. But his reaction wasn't what I expected. His face changed in a way that stuck with me. It wasn't just confusion. It was a mix of emotions I couldn't fully understand at the time. There was fear, definitely. But there was also something else, something like suspicion, or maybe even disappointment. It was like he didn't know whether to believe what he had just seen, or if he thought I had somehow tricked him. For a moment, I felt just as unsettled by his reaction as I did by the light itself. I started to question myself again. Was there some explanation I was missing? Some detail I hadn't noticed? Some reason this could happen that had nothing to do with anything strange? But no matter how many times I thought about it, I couldn't come up with anything that made sense. It wasn't random. It wasn't inconsistent. It happened the same way every time. 3 pulls, 3 responses. Even now, looking back, I still don't have a solid explanation. I'm not someone who jumps to supernatural conclusions. I like things to make sense. I prefer logic, cause and effect, to things you can understand and explain. But that experience doesn't fit neatly into any of that. What stays with me the most isn't just the light turning on and off. It's the feeling that came with it. The certainty that I wasn't imagining it. The way it happened in 2 completely different places, years apart, under the same exact conditions. I don't know what it was. Maybe there's some rare electrical explanation that I've never heard of. Maybe it was just an incredible coincidence. Or maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is this. Every time I think about it, I can still picture that pull string in my hand. The quiet pause after I let go, and the moment the light decided to answer back. Story 7. When I was around 6 to 8 years old, before my parents got divorced, we lived in a house that my family had built from the ground up. It wasn't an old place with history or previous owners. It was brand new, designed exactly how my parents wanted it. The house itself was beautiful. It had a finished basement, a 2-car garage, 3 bedrooms, and high vaulted ceilings that made everything feel open and spacious. From the outside, it looked like the perfect home for a family. But even though everything about it seemed normal, there were things that happened inside that never felt right. At first, it was small things, easy to ignore, easy to explain away if you didn't think about them too much. One of the earliest strange things I remember is a punch bowl that we had sitting on the kitchen counter. It wasn't being touched. No one was near it. There was no reason for anything unusual to happen, and yet, out of nowhere, it exploded. Not cracked, not tipped over, it shattered. The sound was loud and sudden, like glass breaking under pressure. But there was nothing that could have caused it. No one had bumped into the counter. There wasn't any extreme heat or cold. It just broke, completely on its own. My parents tried to make sense of it, but there was no clear explanation. Eventually, it became one of those things that people shrug off and move past, even if it doesn't sit right. Then there was the doorbell. I had one of those small toy doorbells that kids put inside their rooms, the kind you press and it makes a little chime. It was nothing special, just a simple plastic thing. But for some reason, it started going off by itself at random times. Sometimes during the day, but more often at night. I would be lying in bed, the house quiet and dark, and suddenly it would ring. Not just once either. Sometimes it would go off more than once, like someone was actually pressing it. At first, we assumed it was just broken. Maybe a wiring issue, maybe cheap electronics malfunctioning. So my parents got me a new one. But the new one did the exact same thing. That's when it started to feel less like a faulty toy and more like something we couldn't explain. My mom had her own experiences too. One night she was sitting in the living room reading. Everything was calm and quiet when she suddenly heard a knock. Not on a door, not on a window, on the wall. Our house was made with solid brick on the outside and drywall on the inside. The sound came from the inside wall, clear and deliberate. She froze, listening. Then it happened again. Knock. But it didn't stay in one place. The knocking started moving. It went from one part of the wall to another, as if something was traveling along inside it. Then it circled the room, the sound shifting from one side to another. My mom got up, trying to figure out what was happening, and the knocking followed her. It moved with her as she left the living room and went toward the bedroom. By the time she got there, My dad was already alert. He had heard enough to know something wasn't right, and he had grabbed a shotgun, ready to deal with whatever might be causing the noise. But there was nothing to see, only the sound. The knocking continued, moving into their closet, then above their bed, like something invisible was traveling through the walls and ceiling. Eventually, it just stopped. No explanation, no source, just silence. Even as a kid, I could feel that something was wrong in that house. I didn't understand it, but I felt it. I was too scared to sleep in my own room most nights. Instead, I slept in a small toddler bed placed near my parents' room. Being close to them made me feel safer, even if I didn't know exactly what I was afraid of. One night, I woke up in the dark. Everything was quiet, but something felt off. I looked toward my parents' room and saw their closet door. It was opening, slowly, on its own. Then it closed, then opened again. There was no one there, no sound of footsteps, no movement, nothing but the door moving back and forth in the darkness. I remember lying there, frozen, watching it, too scared to make a sound. Eventually, I must have fallen back asleep, but the image stayed with me. We had 2 dogs during the time we lived in that house. Both were Cocker Spaniels, but we had them at different times. One when I was very young, and another when I was around 7. Both dogs behaved in ways that added to the uneasiness of the house. There was a long hallway that led from the living room to the bedrooms. For some reason, the dogs hated that hallway. They would stand at one end of it, staring down the length of it, barking, not playful barking, not alert barking. It was aggressive, fearful, like they were reacting to something they could see that we couldn't. Sometimes they would run into my parents' bedroom, jump onto the bed, and start barking and growling at the ceiling. Not the walls, not the door, the ceiling. At one point, my parents thought maybe there were animals in the attic. Raccoons or something similar that could be making noise or moving around above us. So they called an exterminator to check it out. But there was nothing. No animals, no nests, no tracks. The attic was completely clear, and still the dogs kept reacting the same way. My mom used to say she always felt like something was hovering over her, especially when she was lying in bed. Not touching her, not visible, but present. Close enough to feel, even if she couldn't explain how. The worst experience, the one that has stayed with me the most, happened during a sleepover. I had a friend staying the night and, like always, I was too scared to sleep alone. My mum stayed in my room until we both fell asleep, lying on the floor next to my bed. At some point during the night, I woke up. I don't know why. There was no noise, no clear reason. But when I opened my eyes, I saw something that I can still picture clearly to this day. There was a woman standing in my room. She had a blue tint to her skin, almost glowing in the darkness, and she looked like my mom. Not exactly the same, but close enough that it was unmistakable. She was standing where my mom had been lying earlier. She looked at me and raised her hand, slowly curling her finger in a "come here" motion. I remember feeling this strange pull, like I was being drawn toward her without fully understanding why. I got out of bed. Step by step, I moved closer. Everything felt quiet and heavy, like the air itself had changed. Then, without really thinking, I reached over and turned on the light, and she was gone. Just like that. The room was empty. The normal world snapped back into place, but the fear hit me all at once. I ran out of the room and straight into my parents' bedroom, crying and trying to explain what I had seen. My mom still remembers that night. She remembers me coming in, terrified, talking about the blue lady that had been in my room. It wasn't a dream, at least it didn't feel like one, not then and not now. A year or two before we moved out, something else happened that added another layer to everything. Our neighbors started building a house nearby. During the construction, they dug into the ground and found artifacts, objects left behind by Native Americans who had once lived in the area. There were no bones, but there was clear evidence that people had been there long before any modern homes existed. At the time, I didn't fully understand the significance of that. It was just an interesting detail, but looking back, it's hard not to connect it to everything else that happened. Years later, we went back to the house for some paperwork related to taxes. While we were there, we talked to the new owners and asked them if they had experienced anything unusual. Now, the wife hesitated for a moment, then said something that made my stomach drop. She said that sometimes, when she was lying in bed, she felt like something was hovering over her. The same feeling my mom had described years before. Hearing that confirmed something for me. Whatever was in that house, whatever caused those things to happen, it didn't leave when we did. I can't fully explain any of it. I've tried to think of logical reasons to break it down into something that makes sense. Maybe some of it can be explained. Maybe some of it can't. But I know what I saw. I know what my family experienced. And whether people believe it or not, I believe there was something in that house. You've heard about Fred in the garage, lights that answer back. Kids called down the hallway by blue-tinted strangers and shadows that move when you notice them. Which story so far feels closest to something that's happened to you? Have you ever had a moment you knew you'd already dreamed? Tell me while you listen on. Story 8. When I was a kid, around 11 years old, my younger brother and I spent the night at my grandparents' house. He was about 5 at the time. We were sleeping together in one of the spare bedrooms, a room that had always made me uneasy for reasons I couldn't fully explain. It wasn't anything obvious, nothing you could point at and say, "That's why it's scary," but the feeling was always there in the background. One detail that always stood out to me was a painting hanging on the wall. It was one of those old-style portraits of Jesus where the eyes seem to follow you no matter where you stand in the room. As a kid, that alone was enough to make me uncomfortable. No matter where I moved, it felt like I was being watched. I would try not to look at it too long, but at the same time, it was hard to ignore. The bed we were sleeping in had a wooden headboard with a built-in shelf. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple space where a few books were stacked, along with a small lamp. That lamp became the center of everything that happened that night. Before going to sleep, I was lying in bed reading one of the books from the shelf. The lamp was right next to me, within easy reach, and it was working perfectly fine. The light was steady, nothing unusual about it at all. I remember clearly finishing my reading, setting the book down, and reaching up to turn the lamp off before going to sleep. That part is important, because it means I knew exactly how everything was when I fell asleep. The bulb was in place. The lamp was normal. Nothing was out of the ordinary. At some point during the night, I must have fallen into a deep sleep, because I don't remember waking up at all until the morning. There were no strange noises, no dreams that I can recall, nothing that hinted that anything unusual had happened while we were asleep. When I woke up, everything seemed normal at first. The room was quiet, the early morning light just starting to come in. I was still half asleep, not fully aware yet, just going through that slow process of waking up. Without really thinking, I reached up toward the lamp like I always did, intending to turn it on. But the moment my fingers touched it, something felt wrong. Instead of the familiar shape of the bulb under my hand, there was nothing there. My fingers brushed against empty space where the bulb should have been. For a second, my brain didn't fully process it. It was such a small, strange detail that it took a moment to register. Then I opened my eyes and looked directly at the lamp. The bulb was gone, completely missing. I just stared at it for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. The lamp itself was still there, exactly where it had been the night before, but the bulb that had been inside it was no longer there. At first, I thought maybe I was still dreaming, or maybe I had somehow made a mistake the night before. But that didn't make sense. I clearly remembered using the lamp, clearly remembered turning it off before going to sleep. There was no way I had imagined that. I sat up a little more and started looking around, trying to figure out where the bulb could have gone. That's when I saw it. It was sitting on the far side of the headboard shelf on my brother's side of the bed. That didn't make any sense at all. The lamp itself was on my side, right next to where I had been sleeping. For the bulb to end up all the way over there, it would have had to be unscrewed from the lamp and then carefully placed on the opposite side of the shelf. I just sat there, staring at it, trying to piece together what could have happened. The most logical explanation was that one of us had done it in the middle of the night. Either I had taken the bulb out, or my brother had. But the more I thought about it, the less that explanation felt right. If I had done it, I would have had to unscrew the bulb, then reach all the way across my brother's sleeping body to place it on his side of the shelf. Not just a quick movement, but something that would require leaning over him, possibly even putting weight on him. There's no way he wouldn't have woken up. And if he had done it, then the situation was reversed. He would have had to reach across me, stretching over my body in the same way, unscrew the bulb, and then place it back on his side. Again, something that would almost certainly wake me up. But neither of us remembered anything like that happening. There were no signs that either of us had been awake during the night. No memory of getting up, no memory of touching the lamp. Nothing. We were just two kids who had gone to sleep normally and woken up to something that didn't add up. I remember asking my brother about it, trying to see if maybe he had done it without realizing. But he looked just as confused as I felt. He had no idea what I was talking about, and he insisted he hadn't touched the lamp at all. And the truth is, I believed him. Even at that age, I could tell when he was lying or making something up, and this didn't feel like that. He seemed genuinely unaware, just as puzzled as I was. That's when the whole thing started to feel off. It wasn't just that the bulb had moved, it was how it had moved. The placement was too deliberate, too careful. It wasn't like it had fallen or rolled off. It had been set down, placed. That detail stuck with me. I started thinking about the room again, the painting on the wall, the feeling I always had when I was in there, that quiet sense that something wasn't quite right. And then another thought hit me, one that made my stomach drop a little. That moment when I first reached up to turn on the lamp. If I hadn't looked first, if I had just pushed my fingers a little further into the socket, I could have seriously hurt myself. The idea of that made the whole thing even worse. It wasn't just strange anymore. It felt dangerous in a way I couldn't explain. For the rest of the morning, I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept looking at the lamp, then at the bulb sitting on the other side, like I was expecting it to move again when I wasn't watching. Nothing else happened, at least not that day. Everything stayed quiet, normal on the surface. But the memory stuck with me in a way that other childhood experiences didn't. It wasn't dramatic. There was no figure in the room, no sound in the night. Nothing you could point to as obviously supernatural. Just a missing bulb. and the question of how it got there. Even now, when I think back on it, I try to come up with a reasonable explanation. Sleepwalking is probably the closest thing that makes sense. Maybe one of us got up in the middle of the night, did it without realizing, and went back to sleep. But even that doesn't fully explain it. The movement required, the placement, the lack of any memory or disturbance, it all feels just a little too precise. And then there's that feeling I had in that room, the one I could never quite explain. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it wasn't. All I know is that when I reached for that lamp that morning, I was expecting something familiar, something normal. Instead, I found empty space where something should have been, and that's the part that has never really left me. Story 9. When I lived in North Carolina, I had a group of friends who were really into the supernatural, metaphysics, and all kinds of unexplained phenomena. I've always been someone who keeps an open mind about things like that, even if I don't fully believe in them. One of my friends, let's call him Ken, was particularly convinced about certain spirits. He would often tell us that a black cat, or a spirit in the form of a black cat, had been following him around since he was 12. According to him, anyone who slept over at his house or spent enough time around him would eventually see this cat too. All of Ken's friends claimed to have seen it at some point and treated the cat like it was part of the family. I never saw it myself though, not for years, until one night that changed everything. It was around 3 a.m, and I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. The house itself creaked here and there, which wasn't unusual. It was about 40 years old, and so it made the typical groans and pops that old buildings do. I was tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable, letting my mind drift off when I finally rolled onto my right side. Just as I was beginning to drift off, I felt it. A sudden, heavy pressure right behind me on the mattress, as if a small animal had leapt up and landed just inches from where I was lying. For a moment I froze. My heart started to pound, and I felt completely paralyzed with fear. My mind jumped straight to the worst-case scenario. I imagined someone standing over me, pushing down on the mattress as if they were about to attack. The thought was terrifying, almost like I could feel the imaginary hand pressing down near my neck. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I was suspended between panic and disbelief. Then, right before I fully opened my eyes, I saw it, not in the room, but in my mind's eye, the black cat. It looked exactly like the one Ken and his friends had described. Sleek, black fur, small but solid, with glowing eyes that seemed almost alive in that brief moment. It was such a precise vision that I felt an overwhelming sense of recognition, as though I'd been expecting it all along. The fear that had been gripping me instantly melted into relief. I realized I wasn't in danger. Nothing was about to harm me, and that the sudden pressure behind me had been this strange, intangible presence, not a person, not a threat, but the black cat. It was one of the most bizarre experiences I've ever had. I still don't understand how my mind could simulate the sensation of something jumping onto the bed just 5 or 6 inches away from me while I was barely conscious. It felt so real that I could have sworn it had actually happened. For a few moments after, I just lay there, completely still, nor overwhelmed with relief that I hadn't been attacked and grateful that the sudden shock wasn't a threat to my life. That night was completely isolated. I never saw the cat again, and nothing like that ever happened to me before or since. Even so, the memory of that single, strange moment has stayed with me. I replay it in my mind sometimes, wondering what it really was. Was it a sleep hallucination triggered by suggestion and expectation. Was it some kind of projection of Ken's stories into my mind? Or was it really some sort of spirit that existed just for that brief instant? I can't explain it, but the clarity and intensity of that experience made it feel undeniable. Even now, years later, I still think about that night often. I remember the way my chest tightened when I first felt that pressure, the instant surge of fear that came over me, and the almost surreal relief when I realized it was just the cat. But the memory is vivid enough that I can recall every small detail, from the angle I was lying at to the exact way the cat appeared in my mind's eye. It was a moment that blurred the line between imagination and reality, fear and reassurance, and it left me with a lingering sense of mystery that I've never been able to shake. Story 10. I've always been certain that my old house was haunted. It had belonged to my aunt's husband, whose family had lived in the same town for generations. The house itself was built sometime in the 1800s, and at first it actually felt pretty cool. It had that old, solid feel, creaking floors and tall ceilings, the kind of place that has history built into its walls. When I was in high school, my mom was the principal, which meant she was often staying late for basketball games, school events, and meetings. On those nights, I had the entire house to myself, which was fun at first, but it didn't take long before I realized I wasn't entirely alone. Almost every night, I would hear noises, thumps, things moving, footsteps upstairs. At first, I tried to chalk it up to the house settling, to old wood and pipes, but it started to feel deliberate, like something was moving around just above me. My dog, who was old and normally very calm, would lose her mind whenever these things happened. She refused to go into certain rooms. Her fur stood on end, and she would bark like crazy, and that was terrifying in itself because she was usually completely passive. I had never even heard her bark at another person before, let alone at what she must have sensed in that house. The weird things weren't limited to sounds. Radios would turn on by themselves while I was home alone. One night, I was upstairs, and suddenly a radio flipped on full blast. I jumped and yanked the cord out of the wall, heart racing, thinking that would end it. I ran downstairs, only to find the kitchen radio had turned on full volume the moment I entered. It was infuriating and unsettling at the same time. I would jokingly tell my mom in the mornings, "Please stop unplugging my hairdryer," and she would just stare at me and insist she hadn't touched anything. But I knew it wasn't her. One weekend, my father came to visit. My parents were divorced, and he stayed in a spare room downstairs that had a couch, a big plush chair, a table, and an old antique banjo propped against the wall. That night, I got spooked in my own room, probably from all the noises that had been happening over the years, so I decided to go sit in the chair near my dad. I dozed off lightly, trying to relax, when I was suddenly woken by the sound of someone strumming the banjo. The strings sounded clear and deliberate, like someone was playing. My dad woke up at the same time and he whispered, "Did you hear that?" We sat in silence for a moment, both listening, but there was no one there. The banjo hadn't moved, and nothing else in the room seemed disturbed. The noise faded as quickly as it had started, but the moment stayed with me. It wasn't like the terrifying stories I've read about, where people see apparitions or objects fly across rooms, but it was unsettling in a way I couldn't explain. No matter how rational I tried to be, I couldn't come up with a logical explanation for what happened in that house. Even years later, I think back to those nights and still feel that strange tension, the mix of curiosity and fear. The house had an energy that felt alive, like it remembered everything that had happened within its walls. My dog's reactions, the radios turning on, and the banjo all made me realize that the house wasn't just old wood and history. It was something else entirely. Something I couldn't see, but could definitely feel. And something that made me respect the quiet, the eerie presence of that home every time I was left alone in it. Story 11. I was 16 and completely bored one evening at my girlfriend's cousin's house. The family was Thai, and as you might know, Thai culture is very superstitious. I'm only half Thai, so I've never been as deep into the traditions, but my girlfriend, her cousin, and her friend were Thai all the way. That night, we decided to make a Ouija board just for fun. We didn't have a real one, so we used a piece of printer paper and wrote letters and numbers on it. We even lit some candles and politely invited spirits to join us. Why not, right? It felt kind of silly at first, but also exciting. The first thing that freaked us out was how the coin we used to move across the board seemed to move by itself. It was fast, accurate, and sometimes spelled out names of our future boyfriends and girlfriends. At first, it was easy to blame Joey, the most excitable person in the group, for secretly pushing the coin, and we laughed nervously at how good he was at making it seem like the board was working. But then we decided to test it seriously. My girlfriend volunteered to be the only one touching the coin directly, while the rest of us just lightly rested our fingers on her elbow. She closed her eyes and looked up toward the ceiling, completely away from the board. We asked a few small, casual questions at first, but nothing seemed to happen. We laughed nervously and asked our final question, the one we probably shouldn't have. Is anyone here? That's when everything went wrong. My girlfriend screamed, and we all jumped back in shock. We watched as she continued moving the coin across the board, spelling out the words, "Stop, stop, stop, stop." Her eyes were still closed, her face tilted toward the ceiling, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. She couldn't control her body. It continued for what felt like 30 seconds, maybe more, before the movement finally stopped. We were all frozen, too scared to speak. Without saying a word, we tore the paper in half and flushed it down the toilet. No one moved. The room was silent except for her quiet sobs. She later told us she had absolutely no control over what her body was doing. She had wanted to look down, to jump away from the board, but she simply couldn't. It was as if something else had taken over, and for those terrifying moments, she was powerless. That night left a permanent mark on me. I've never forgotten it. Even though I'm not always a believer in the supernatural, I've been convinced of the unknown ever since. There are things out there that we can't explain, things that defy logic, and that night made me realize just how real and unpredictable they can be. The fear, the helplessness, and the sheer intensity of that moment are still vivid in my mind. And I'll never forget the feeling of being so close to something I couldn't see, but could definitely feel. Story 12. It was a brand new house. My parents had it built exactly how they wanted, and it was finished in 2001. Everything fit perfectly, and at first life felt completely normal. But within the first month, strange things started happening. I was only 7 at the time, so it all felt both exciting and scary in ways I didn't fully understand. The first experiences actually happened to my mum. She would walk out of a room and the TV would turn off on its own. Then she would come back and it would turn on again. With our old TV, you could hear that piercing, buzzing sound shortly after it turned off, which made it even creepier. Later that week, she noticed the volume changing on its own, but only for particular songs. One of the songs that played was her favorite, which is how she even noticed it. At first, she tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe she was imagining things. The moment she started truly suspecting something strange was when she set my 1-year-old sister on the bed while she was crying so she could change her. As she turned around, she heard a very clear female voice consoling her sister. The voice said, "It's okay, honey. It's all right," in a very motherly way. My mum initially brushed it off, or thinking it was just her mind filling in what she would say if she weren't busy changing her. But she noticed that my sister had calmed down instantly. That was the first time she wondered if there was something beyond the ordinary in the house. A few days later, while my mom was in the kitchen, the TV was turning off and on again. Frustrated, she said aloud, "Okay, if there is someone in here, give me a sign." Almost immediately, the cap from the milk jug unscrewed itself and rolled across the counter, landing neatly between her feet. She was understandably freaked out and called my dad right away. My dad had his own experiences, though they were different. He described seeing a wispy shadow that appeared to be a young girl. She would stand at the foot of the bed or beside him, watching quietly. One morning, he woke up to her presence and finally said, "I can see you." The shadow immediately disappeared. After that, whenever he saw her moving around, he would say the same thing, and she would vanish again. I had one particularly strange experience myself. I had pulled out the drawers of an old dresser and couldn't put them back in, so I left them out. When I returned, the clothes were scattered all over the room. I told my mum, and she went in, looked around and said aloud, "You can look, but at least put them back." She left the room, and when she came back later, the clothes were neatly folded and returned to the drawers. My older sister had what might have been the most dramatic encounter. She was cleaning my room because I was too young to do it properly. I had one of those big Bratz dolls that could blink, shake her head, and had large feet marked with yes and no, and she could talk. My sister said she watched the doll pick itself up, fly across the corner of the room, and land at a 45-degree angle on its round head. She screamed and ran downstairs, saying when my mom came in, the volume of the radio had turned up on its own again. After all these experiences, we decided to do some research on the land where our house was built. Interestingly, no one else in the neighborhood had reported anything strange. What we found was shocking. The property had once been a Civil War plantation, and our house was built right on what had been considered the epicenter of the land. The history seemed to line up with the strange events we were experiencing. Looking back, we truly think the house was haunted. Random objects moving across rooms, voices, and the things we saw are hard to explain any other way. The history of the land added a layer of understanding, and while we can't prove anything, it all made sense in a way that felt undeniable. It's a house and property full of memories, both ordinary and extraordinary, and those experiences left a lasting impression on all of us. Story 13. We had a guy, let's call him Tyler, who was my stepdad's nephew. He was staying with us because his parents weren't really able to take care of him, and both he and his brother were trying to get their lives back on track. Tyler was sleeping on the couch near the computer in the living room. I didn't have my own room since I was only there on weekends and during school breaks, so I usually stayed in a step-sibling's room if they weren't home, or, like this time, on the sectional in the living room. From the moment he arrived, Tyler started talking about ghosts supposedly tormenting him at night. He even posted videos to Facebook, which were admittedly hilarious, of him hiding under blankets on the couch, acting terrified of noises you couldn't hear through the phone. We all just assumed he was overreacting. He was still adjusting to being sober, and we didn't take him seriously. This went on for about 2 weeks. Then one weekend, I came to stay. It was Saturday night, and everyone else had gone out around 11 o'clock, since they had to wake up early for church the next morning. I didn't care much about sleeping early, so I stayed up. Around 1:30 a.m., I was still on my iPod, listening to music and watching YouTube videos. Finally, I decided to call it a night and took out my earbuds. Suddenly, I heard typing on the computer and the mouse clicking. Assuming Tyler was still awake, I thought I'd hang out and chat with him before going to bed. I got up and the sound stopped. Walking around the corner, and I realized he was clearly passed out on the couch. The computer chair swiveled toward him. That one freaked Tyler out more than me. I was used to odd things by then, and his reaction when I told him what had happened was priceless. For me, though, the truly unsettling part was the woods behind the house. I grew up in rural Oklahoma and spent most of my days and nights wandering through the woods on my family's farmland. I wasn't the type to scare easily, not even close. I'd often go on long walks with music in my ears, exploring wherever I felt like going, and I was excited to know that this new house had woods nearby where I could do the same. But here, something felt off. Almost every time I tried to go out there at night, I would get an overwhelming sense of dread and malice. Just standing 20 yards from the mouth of the trail would fill me with fear and despair I couldn't explain. Even during walks around the yard, the closer I got to the trail, the chills I felt intensified. When night started falling, I would end my walks abruptly and sprint back to the house. For years, I avoided going into those woods alone or after dark. Even with my past experiences, the feeling of unease there was impossible to ignore. It wasn't until shortly before my parents' divorce that the sensation suddenly vanished. After that, I could go on walks in the woods at night without feeling terrified, and I spent my last few months there exploring them freely. The first experience that truly confirmed that something unusual was happening, however, occurred in the twins' room. This house was originally a mobile home attached to a brick foundation with hardwood floors, leaving a hollow cavity between the floor and the ground. One night, a few of us were hanging out in the twins' room, talking and joking around. Suddenly, we heard extremely loud footsteps echoing from the area around the couch in the computer room. It wasn't just a casual creak or a thump. You could hear the boots hitting the floor with a metallic, hollow sound. All three of us heard it clearly and bolted out of the room, ready to confront whoever or whatever was making those noises. But when we got there was nothing. That was what made it so unsettling. If I had been the only one to hear it, I could have rationalized it. Maybe the floorboards shifted, maybe it was just my imagination. But hearing it with two other people made it undeniable. There was something else in the house, something moving with purpose, making those heavy, echoing steps. From that moment on, the house never felt entirely normal to me. Even small noises made me pause and listen. I couldn't explain most of the things I experienced there, and knowing that others had witnessed them too made it feel all the more real. Story 14. Ever since I can remember, my family has had these strange abilities, premonitions, déjà vu, odd instincts about things before they happen. People in my family rarely talk about it, but stories surface now and then. My mother, when she was little, described an elderly man standing at the foot of her bed, detailing his height, the clothes he wore, even the way he carried himself. She had never seen her grandfather in real life, but somehow she described him perfectly. Later, her sister tried to experiment with this sort of perception when they were teens, trying to tune in to whatever it was they sensed. But instead, she described it as doing a full 360. They both quickly decided it was best not to explore it. My grandmother and great-grandmother, in their own time, also had experiences they refused to talk about. It's the knowledge that this runs in my blood that really unsettles me, more than the experiences themselves. Even though I've grown up knowing about this, I've always treated it with a mix of disbelief and sarcasm, partly for my own sanity. I tell myself that these inklings, these premonitions and sensations, are probably just coincidence or misinterpretation. I never discuss it with anyone because people would think I'm insane. My boyfriend, for example, would laugh at me if I told him how seriously I consider strange feelings or flashes of awareness. But lately, over the past couple of weeks, I've noticed something different, something that's harder to ignore. You know that feeling when you look out of the corner of your eye and think there's someone standing there, or a strange shape, maybe a shadowy figure, and then when you look directly, it's gone? Most people experience that occasionally, and usually it's nothing. But recently I've been seeing these shadows consistently. Sometimes they're just a dark shape, other times they take on the appearance of a man. Always humanoid in form, but impossibly dark, almost like the shadow itself is denser than reality. At first, it was just a flicker at the edge of my vision, something I thought I could rationalize, but then it started happening more frequently. A couple of days ago, I noticed the shadow more clearly. I was sitting at my computer, and when I glanced up at the window across from me, I saw a humanoid silhouette reflected in the glass. It wasn't moving quickly, but it was unmistakably there, just standing silently, watching. I froze for a few moments, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the reflection, a combination of night shadows and light from my screen. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then something happened that made it feel even more real. 3 nights ago, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. Everything was quiet and still, and the house felt unusually empty. As I was standing there, mid-task, a shampoo bottle somehow fell to the floor in the shower. It wasn't near the edge. There was no draft or anything that could have knocked it over. That little incident would have been easy to dismiss, except for how frequently these little things have been happening now. Lights flickering, shadows moving at the corner of my vision, objects shifting slightly, small, but consistent enough that I can't ignore them. It's difficult to explain exactly how these experiences feel. It's not just seeing shadows or objects moving. It's the sense that noticing it somehow invites it to be more present. The more I focus on it, the stronger the awareness becomes. Every time I glance at a window, a mirror, or even a dark corner of a room, I find myself expecting something, and more often than not I do see something, a silhouette, just for a second, just enough to feel that deep, prickling fear. The fear itself is exhausting because it comes with the knowledge that this isn't purely imagination. I can feel the family history in it, that inherited awareness, that intuition that something unseen might be near. When I think about it logically, I try to remind myself that peripheral vision can play tricks, reflections can deceive, and random environmental noises can feel purposeful when I'm already on edge. But then I remember the stories from my mother and grandmother. I think about the elderly figure my mother described, and how my great-grandmother saw things she refused to explain. And when those shadows appear in my home, in moments that are too specific to dismiss, the sense of rationalization starts to falter. There's also this ongoing tension in knowing that I can sense things but can't control it. It's like having a door in my mind that I can't shut fully. Sometimes I dip into it, exploring the sensation of seeing or knowing something that's not yet visible, and it terrifies me. It's a heady mixture of curiosity and dread. I want to know what's there, to understand it, but each time I do, I feel like I'm opening the door wider, letting the unknown closer to me. It's an instinct to pull back, but my own awareness keeps me tethered, aware that I've caught glimpses of something I shouldn't be able to see. The physical sensations are subtle but undeniable. When I notice a shadow or a flicker at the corner of my vision, my body responds before my mind fully registers it. My heart rate spikes, my muscles tighten, and there's an almost electric prickle along my skin. The awareness is not just mental, it's instinctive. And once I see the shadow clearly, even in a reflection, it's impossible to ignore. There's a weight to it, like the room itself feels denser, heavier, more charged. I've learned to acknowledge it with a sort of cautious, ironic detachment. I tell myself sarcastically that it's probably nothing, that I'm just imagining it, that it's all coincidence. But part of me knows that the dismissive tone is protective. I can't completely admit the truth, even to myself, because the acknowledgement makes it feel real. I keep these experiences to myself. Nobody in my life would understand, and I can't risk sounding insane. I've trained myself to treat these feelings with a mixture of cynicism and humor to keep myself grounded. Yet, no matter how much I rationalize or distract myself, the experiences continue. There's a rhythm to it now, a consistency that can't be ignored. Shadows move where they shouldn't, objects fall with no explanation, and reflections capture shapes that aren't present when I turn to look directly. It's exhausting because I want to sleep, want to relax, and want to feel safe in my own home. But even in familiar spaces, I feel watched. Every glance at the corner of a room, every reflection in a window, every small movement in the night carries weight. I've tried to reason it away scientifically, psychologically, but it persists, and the family history doesn't help. It's in my blood, in my perception, a subtle inheritance of awareness that I never asked for, but can't escape. I've started taking small measures to cope, keeping my rooms well lit at night, avoiding prolonged reflection in windows, and consciously deciding not to chase the sensations. I know that fear amplifies everything, and that my mind is prone to filling in patterns in the dark. Yet, even when I know this, the experiences continue. The shadows appear, the objects shift, the reflections betray glimpses of humanoid forms that vanish when I try to focus on them. Acknowledging this is terrifying. It's like seeing a door ajar in a hallway you've walked past your whole life, and knowing that behind it is something you weren't meant to see. And even if it's just your mind, just perception, just inherited sensitivity, it still shakes you. It's impossible to feel fully safe when the evidence, no matter how subtle, remains. At the same time, I feel compelled to watch, to notice, to record it in my mind. I can't unsee it, can't unknow the way these things appear in my peripheral vision, in shadows, in reflections. I live with a constant awareness now, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and inherited instinct that I can neither fully embrace nor dismiss. And that tension, that living on the edge of the unknown, is what makes the experience so consuming, so unforgettable, and so terrifying all at once. Story 15. I had come home from college for the summer, looking forward to a few months of relaxation and familiar comforts, and our old cat, my loyal, slightly judgmental companion was immediately glued to me the moment I walked in the door. She had always done that whenever I came home, silently staking her claim as my personal shadow, and it was comforting in a weird way. To set the scene, our house was a single-story ranch with a full basement, which was divided into 3 rooms. The basement steps led down into a finished family room, and right at the bottom of the steps was an open entryway to the second room. My parents were out of town for the weekend, so it was just me and the cat. I had settled into the basement that night, planning to watch some TV before bed. The basement was fully equipped. The bar I had built with my dad, a gas fireplace, and a big reclining sectional sofa, so it had always been my favorite hangout spot. I ended up dozing off there after a long day, curled up with the cat somewhere nearby. In my dream, I found myself running through the house, chased by the classic horror movie serial killer, masked, carrying a massive, sharp weapon, and utterly relentless. Every time I tried to escape through a door, I'd inexplicably end up somewhere completely different in the house, like some cruel, twisted loop designed to trap me. Eventually, I stumbled down to the basement, and my eyes caught the top of a head slumped over the sectional. Without thinking, I bolted over, yelling, "Help! There's some nutjob with a knife chasing me!" Only to realize it wasn't someone else. It was me. My own body, slumped on the couch, throat slashed, blood everywhere, but wearing the exact same clothes I had on in real life. My brain literally could not process it, and I went into full meltdown mode, heart pounding, adrenaline flooding every nerve. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard something at the stairs. I looked up, and in an instant, the killer from earlier was standing just a few feet away, knife arcing toward my neck. My scream could have shattered glass. My panic was instant, primal, and overwhelming. And then everything went black. I shot awake, drenched in sweat, heart hammering in my chest, trembling so violently I must have looked like I'd been electrocuted. The cat, startled by my sudden outburst, leapt off the couch, glaring at me like I had personally insulted her intelligence, before settling a few feet away. She gave me that slow, disapproving stare of judgment that only a cat can manage. I started trying to calm down, and after a few seconds, my gaze fell to the glass top table next to the couch. As I caught my breath, I noticed a thin, bright red line across my neck, like a pressure mark. My rational side immediately kicked in. Maybe my shirt collar had shifted while I was slumped forward, I reasoned. But the timing made my pulse spike again. The cat, apparently satisfied that no immediate threats were present, jumped back onto the couch and then leapt to the back of it, curling up to go back to sleep. That's when things got truly unsettling. Just as she was about to settle, her head snapped up, ears fully perked, staring intently toward the entryway to the next room. It was pitch black beyond the doorway, so dark I couldn't see even a foot into it, and the cat was fixated. Then it started to growl. Not a little annoyed hiss or playful rumble, but a low, sustained, menacing growl that lasted 7 or 8 seconds. This cat never growled. She was probably 10 years old at the time, and I had heard her growl maybe once before. I froze. My mind immediately jumped to the most extreme, irrational conclusions. Something was there, something waiting in the darkness, something that could easily end me if I made a single wrong move. Moving toward the stairs was completely out of the question, and even flipping the light switches was dangerous because they were right next to that pitch-black entryway. I was trapped in the basement with my own adrenaline running wild. For a solid minute or two, I sat there, trembling, or clutching an empty beer bottle like a makeshift weapon, ready to defend myself from whatever was lurking just beyond the shadows. I considered opening a basement window and climbing out into the yard. Our house had brick window wells, so escape was physically possible, but I wasn't ready to leave the cat behind or risk exposure. The cat, finally deciding there was nothing tangible there, curled back up beside me and went to sleep. I stayed motionless, watching the doorway for a few more moments, my heart still racing. Eventually, I gathered the courage to sprint past the black entryway and up the basement stairs. Once I reached the main floor, I flipped on every light I could find, bathing the house in a harsh, artificial glow that gave me a small sense of control. That night, I ended up sleeping with my bedroom door locked, my lamp on, and a mini baseball bat clutched tightly in my arms like some last line of defense. It took hours before I could finally convince myself that I was safe, that nothing had actually entered the house, and that the cat's growl was probably a heightened reaction to my own fear. Even then, I couldn't shake the sense that something had been watching us from the shadows, something that wasn't bound by doors or walls. Looking back, it was an intensely irrational, terrifying experience, and I can laugh about it now only in the detached sense of surviving a personal horror story. But at the time, it was pure, unrelenting panic, a perfect storm of nightmare, adrenaline and instinct, with the cat serving as both companion and warning system. That night, I learned just how much even the familiar spaces in your own home can feel alien and dangerous when the mind is primed to expect threats, and how a pet's instincts can sometimes sense things your rational mind refuses to acknowledge. Shadow men on the bunk bed, a black cat that lands on your mattress from nowhere, Ouija boards that won't let go, and nightmares that leave marks on your neck. These people all live this. Which moment would you least want to relive yourself? Would you stay in that house or run? Share your answer and your own story in the comments. And if you want more true horror like this, like the video and subscribe.